These past couple of weeks, we've had some sayings from Jesus that just don't quite make sense. Last week, of course, he says, whoever wishes to save his life will lose it. Whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel will gain it. And this week, of course, he says, if anyone wishes to be first, he shall be the last of all and the servant of all. Just doesn't quite make sense, right? Like, let's say I was about to go into a race. If I wish to be first, I don't think, hopefully I'd be last. In case I was racing any of you in a foot race, you probably would beat me. That's quite obvious, right? But if I wish to be first, I wouldn't make sense that, how come I would be last? I'm going to train, I'm going to do all these things so I can be the first finisher of the race, or at least second or third, not last. And yet this is what he says. Whoever wishes to be first, he shall be the last of all and the servant of all. Of course, I think it depends on what context we're looking at this from. What Jesus is speaking about is not worldly things here, but rather he's speaking of eternal life. If I wish to be number one in this world, well, guess what? I'm not going to be the first in heaven. I might be the last. I might be the servant of all. But of course, in our society, we have this tendency, if I can only be the greatest. But it's not only our society. Even the apostles fell into this, didn't they? There they are on this road, on the road to Capernaum, a road trip. Now, as we all know, on road trips, going to Chicago, wherever it may be, some conversations are going to happen in the back of the vehicle. And this was probably happening. Jesus was probably in front of the caravan or behind it, and the apostles are speaking amongst each other. And what did they ask each other? They're arguing amongst each other. Who of us is the greatest? You can only imagine, right? St. Peter saying, well, he said, I'm going to be the rock of the church, and he's going to build the church upon me, so I must be the greatest. And Andrew going, come on now, Peter, he chose me before he chose you. And St. John this going, but I'm the beloved, right? You can imagine these conversations happening. Maybe they're arguing who is going to be the greatest. And yet Jesus asked him when he gets to Capernaum, what were you arguing about on the way? What was their response? They were silent. They knew it was not something they should have argued about. And this is where he says, if anyone wishes to be first, he shall be the last of all and the servant of all. 2,000 years later, we're still having this conversation. Who amongst us is the greatest? Who amongst us is always right? I know more than you do. Our reading from St. James today in the second reading has a great comment in it. It talks about conflicts and wars. It says, where do the wars and where do the conflicts among you come from? From your passions. From your passions. From your pride. From your selfishness. From that notion that we always have to be right. And I always know more than you do. You know what we call this notion, by the way? Illuminism. Illuminism. Maybe it's not a word that you're familiar with. I was not until I read it in a book, a spiritual book called Deep Prayer, Deep Conversion by Thomas Dubay. And he states that Illuminism is this: the conviction of some people that their ideas, their opinions, their preferences are automatically superior to those of others. When one talks to an Illuminist, evidence contrary to the latter's view has little or no effect on their conviction. Even if the evidence is objectively compelling, it does not penetrate their mind or will. Once again, Illuminism, that they automatically are superior to those of others. And this is where conflicts arise. This is where wars arise, saying, our nation knows more than your nation. We're better than you. Or even in your family. Or in our parish. Or at work. This notion that we know more than you do. Or I know more than you do. And I'm going to lord this over you. Dubay states that the only way that this can be cured is through humility. It is clear, he states, that disagreements with a Illuminist spouse, relative, friend, fellow worker, or parishioner will go nowhere until humility enters the conversation. And that requires conversion. And that requires conversion. Of course, when we talk about humility, when we talk about someone who's going to humble themselves, we don't have to look very far to see a perfect example, do we? Look at Jesus Christ on the cross for us. Look at Jesus humbling himself to take the form of humanity. And in doing this, what did he do? He came down to serve. Now, he was and is the greatest of all of us, ever. He is God. And yet, what did he do? He humbled himself. For who? For you? For me? For all of us. What a great example. And this is what we are called to follow as well. I'd like to put a new saying out there. Maybe not exactly like Jesus, but it can be contradictory at first. Whoever wishes to be great must be humble. Whoever wishes to be great must serve others. And the way that we do this is, yes, following Christ, but even in our thoughts and our interactions with each other, to put others first. Not thinking of how is this going to affect me, but rather, how will this affect the person I'm dealing with? How this will affect them in the way I serve them, to love them, to be with them. Of course, Jesus is a great example of this as well. Every single interaction he had with someone, be it with Peter, Andrew, John, the Samaritan woman at the well, Nicodemus, whoever it was, he didn't treat them all exactly the same. He took them where they were at, and he humbled himself low enough, put himself in their conversation to do what? To help them know God, to help them be great in heaven. His attitude of service, of dying to oneself and putting others first. This is how we can get past this illuminist mentality that many of us, if not all of us, fall into sometime. And when we do this, when we overcome this through humility and being humble, what will happen is we will finally have peace, which we are longing for. Peace in our family, peace in the world, peace in our parish, wherever it may be. But it's each and every one of us desiring to serve, to be humble, to put others first. And when this happens, my brothers and sisters, we will not be the greatest, but we will be great in heaven.